Where's my Manhattan?
Yes. Like the old days.
Yeah.
Where's the coffee table? Oh.
That's
There
right. That's the video thing. I thought it was a water jet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was. Hey, Rusty,
Everybody.
we ready to start?
Yeah.
Are you doing, can you go get a water?
Oh.
Oh, no, I don't. Yeah, so it's okay.
Never mind. He's-
Don't start.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, Rusty Welders.
I know most of the audience, so it's funny to bother to introduce myself. But anyway, I'm Kelly Draper, or Rusty, depending on where you know me, from the History and Genealogy Department at this library. And tonight's program is on KWUR. And there's been kind of a resurgence of interest in the punk rock scene in St. Louis, the early days, swirling around. We're in the center of that was KWR, kind of a place for the different clusters of people around the region to meet up and hear the music they wanted to hear. The so-called progressive stations wouldn't play. And in hanging out, lifelong friendships made and bands formed. Tonight, Greg Kessler is moderating for us. He is the curator of the Archive of St. Louis Punk. On the panel, we have Bob Trammel from Raymilland.
Yeah.
From, what is that band? Welders. Scariano, DJ.
Hi, I'm Greg Kessler. I'm the archivist at the Archive of St. Louis Punk. And the nice thing is, I know most of these people because they were nice enough to sit down, except for sit down and talk to me about the history of punk in St. Louis. I talked to the first person I talked to was Dave. When I was working on my master's thesis, I needed information about the early days of punk rock. And somebody said, you need to talk to Dave Thomas. I said, Dave Thomas. And they said he had the first punk rock radio show in St. Louis, and KWUR, you need to call him. So it'd be great. I called Dave and talked for about an hour and a half. And I was just telling him today, it opened up all kinds of new avenues for research because it just didn't know anything of that time period and knew my little time period of the scene, and that was it. And then since then, I interviewed all the Welders, including Rusty and Stephanie, and spent 3 hours with Steve, which I just told him today, for some reason, when I talked to Dave, we talked about KWUR most of the time. When I talked to Steve, somehow we skipped over KWUR completely and went from, I met Dave and I worked at the radio station to we were in the Singapore. So I didn't get anything from Steve, so this will be interesting tonight. The other thing I want to say is I think it's unique to be able to be a person who was there at the beginning and look back and see what small thing you did has wrought. And the people up here were here at the beginning, were there at the beginning of punk in St. Louis, and 40 years, 50 years later, entire generations have latched on to that scene, and it helped everybody make it through these years. So I went to my first show in '85, and the things these people did in 1976, 1977, 1978 laid the groundwork for my entire adolescence. It has for a couple generations of people since. So tonight we're going to talk about it, and actually I'm just going to ask questions and I'm going to let them talk. I want to start with Dave. Before you got to the radio station, before you got to WashU, can you, or just anybody really, can you set the stage in St. Louis for live music and radio and record stores and things? What was the atmosphere like before you got to WashU?
I mean, I was just like a lot of other kids, I guess, in St. Louis at the time. Classmates would turn me on to stuff. I would go to Reed Berry's house. I think I heard Whole Lotta Love by Led Zeppelin in stereo headphones at your house for the first time. So, all of the normal stuff that people listen to. I started out buying records Beatles and Rolling Stones and Dave Clark 5 and all that stuff. Like a lot of other people my age, I guess. As far as going to shows, gosh, I didn't actually start seeing live bands until my friend Peter and I went to see Uriah Heep at Kiel Auditorium. And oddly, the opening act, like the only tour they ever did was actually Steely Dan. Steely Dan was the first band I ever actually saw. And then it went from there. I did, along with several other people here, I did see the Stooges on the Raw Power Tour in 1973 at the American Theater, I think it was, yeah. You got something to add to that?
August 18th, 1973 was the Stooges at the American Theater. There was an early show and a late show. Late show was supposed to be 11:30. I think it didn't actually come on until like 1 o'clock. It was 7 days after my 12th birthday, and I heard the thing on the radio, and I said to my parents, "Look, will you take me? I will pay for tickets if you'll go." Tickets were $3.50 and $4. So my parents, God bless them, I was lucky enough that they took me to a lot of shows, because my parents were like 31, so they took me to a lot of shows. I was also at that Uriah Heep show, but I did not remember that it was Steely Dan.
Really?
That's weird, yeah. So God bless my parents who indulged my love of music and different music at the time. So we toddled up there, and I paid $3.50 for the better seats. We sat in the mezzanine, and it was a classic Stooges show with the Iggy rolled out the oxygen tank for Iggy, and there was, I had stage tags and whatnot, spray paint and whatnot. My mom cried through the whole thing. So, but God bless my parents. And I have to add to this. So, yeah, classmates, record stores, and magazines was how you got that knowledge back then. Cream Circus, Circus raves. If you got a melody maker, if you could find a melody maker at a record store, you were really doing good. Of course, you were 6, 8, 10 months old by the time you got them, but that was the way to that's how we found music, and that's kind of how we found each other, was the record stores. Somebody take this mic from me.
Steve?
Same thing with me. I grew up in South County and went to a lot of concerts in the 70s, as I think a lot of us did. The interesting thing about how the whole punk thing became was the straight line from glam rock.
Yep.
A few years prior, like 73, 74, 75. And we would see certain groups of small little pockets of people at all the glam rock shows. And those people eventually wound up being in the punk rock scene later on. So that's something that's kind of really important, was the straight line of glam rock to the punk thing. As far as record stores go, it was very, very fertile in the 70s. St. Louis has always been a very big record buying town. And back then it was a crazy record buying town. There were the chain stores like E.J. Corvette's and Sunset Hills and Sears and places like that. You could buy records. In Clayton, there was a stretch of Forsyth that had 3 record stores on it. Discount Records, where Dave eventually wound up working.
Later.
Across the street, there was St. Louis Scariano that had records. Brown Powell, St. Louis Stereo. Down the street was this really great store called Elmore Music Village.
Music Village.
Which was across the street from the old famous bar. The cool thing about Elmore Music Village was you parked on the roof.
Yeah.
It was this crazy 60s building. And when you were in the store, you could actually hear people parking. You could hear cars on the roof. It was a great store. And I started going there when I was like 16. And a few years later, I didn't work there, but I wound up working with several of the people that worked there. My hangout when I was in when I was in high school was this record store in Webster Groves called the Akashic, which was inside the Spectrum. The Spectrum was the big hippie waterbed paraphernalia store. And the Akashic was this tiny little room with 4 walls that was owned by these 3
Assholes.
these 3 crazy decadent guys who gave the term record store curmudgeon great new meanings. They were very influential on me and my development. That was a great story. So yeah, record stores were very, very fertile. Magazines, there was a great magazine called Phonograph Record Magazine that was the house organ of United Artists Records. And they gave it away free in town. And Cream was probably the best and most influential, but PRM was my favorite, and I learned the most from that magazine.
Yep, I agree. Next question. No.
All right, well, how did you go to the radio station? You went to WashU, and what were you studying at WashU?
I'm sorry, did you wanna?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
I just said just go on, I'm sorry.
I didn't go to WashU.
Here, I'm gonna let Dave take over.
I actually went to I started to WashU in 1970, in the fall of 74. I actually went there because my mother, for 45 years, was administrative assistant to the Department of Molecular Microbiology. And I would sometimes spend my summers washing like glassware in the labs, like as a summer job. But in those days, you could go, if you were an employee of a major university, there was a thing called tuition remission. And I basically went to WashU for free because my mother worked there. The radio station actually went on the air on the 4th of July, 1976. It was KWUR, it was Washington University Radio. And it billed itself as America's bicentennial radio station because it was that date, but it was 10 watts. So, you know, it was about a half-mile radius of the airwaves. The guys that had started the radio station because I believe they were engineering students and they were working on a senior project to get FCC licensing for a radio station. And that's what they did. I knew somebody that was doing a history of rock show and he needed somebody to do some engineering for him. So I actually started working there in the summer of 1976. The first organizational meeting was like a month or 2 later. And I convinced them that they should give me the keys to the record library, and that they should give me a show, and that they should make me music director. And so they did, just because I was sort of insistent, and I wanted to be on the radio at the time. So I actually, the first show I had was a thing called Happenings 10 Years Time Ago, based on the Yardbirds song. And I would only play records from 1966. So I was kind of locked in to, you know.
That's brilliant.
Well, yeah, I guess. It was a great year for records. And at the same time, you know, the first sort of milestones of what would eventually become punk rock, I mean, they were already happening. And I think everybody that sits up here was aware of a lot of that stuff. You know, the precursors to punk rock. And I was hearing all that, and it sort of knew that there was this whole thing going, on in New York. There was something brewing in the UK. There were all these cool things that were happening. And by January of 77, that was when I I moved from an hour on Saturday nights to 3.5 hours on Friday nights. It was over that summer break that I actually met Steve, or that winter break that I met Steve.
November of 76. There you go. Oh, Dave and I met in November of 76 through a mutual friend who was working at Peaches.
On Hampton.
Peaches on Hampton, and Peaches came in December 75, and that was kind of a big deal. We've never seen a store like that.
Right.
So yeah, I met Dave through this friend of ours who was working at Peaches. And it just so happened the night after that was the first time Dwight Twilley Band played in St. Louis. And we were both at that show at Rusty Springs, and we traded phone numbers and all that, and wound up hanging out all the time, and started going record shopping and playing records in Dave's basement and things like that. And then when he started on the radio, started hanging out with him.
So you were the first guest to hang out on the radio station. You were the first.
I don't know that he was a guest.
Yeah, well, the Moldy Dogs would come by.
Yeah.
And this band is one of the first bands, I guess, you could label in the punk rock scene. Was this really great kind of garagey, how else would you describe them?
Bowie-ish.
Bowie-ish, really great band.
Ish.
Called Moldy Dogs. One of the guys in the band is this guy Paul Major, who has this band Endless Boogie, who's kind of a big deal these days. They would come by, and I remember one time they came by with Jane and Rusty from this band, the Welders, and they were talking about the first St. Louis Punk Rock Festival at 4th and Pine, which Dave will tell you about.
Oh, yeah, thanks. So yeah, so, and I mean, I quickly brought Steve in to do a radio show. He wasn't a student at WashU. It was just like, come on. We were just gonna sort of take it over and do what we wanted. But the 4th and Pine thing, that was the first time that I saw the Welders. I don't know if I met any of you before that. I don't recall.
It's all fuzzy.
Yeah.
I would assume so. I mean, we may have been at the radio station, but you were, of course, always on the air
Right.
behind the glass, so we were
That probably-
making noise in the
That
answer.
even happened after 4th and Pine, so that was I think that was the first time I actually saw you guys. It was the first time I saw you play.
I know the Dogs came by the station before that.
Yeah, because we did we did some promos, which I think Greg has.
This is the.
That makes sense, because the punk festival was in January of 77, so it was pretty
Right.
early.
Yeah. I was, and the radio show was just getting off the ground at the same time. Are you gonna play it?
So yeah, this
Oh,
is the.
cool.
Oh, I know. The radio program.
Same with St. Louis punk bands, it's very pretentious progressive music, and you don't want to miss St. Louis's first annual punk rock festival, January 11th at 8 p.m. at 4th and Pine. Kicking off the show will be the Cigarette Bus, formerly the Back Alley Boys. The show will continue with the demented visions of the Moldy Dogs, rounding out the bill, St. Louis's only all-girl band of the Welders. Of nasty rock and roll.
Yeah. Visionary. Totally visionary. Yeah. We're gonna talk about that gig.
Sure. So the festival was actually scheduled to be in December of 76, and it was one of those epic snowstorms that we used to have. And so it got postponed to like 2 or 3 weeks later, right? Like deer in the headlights, but yeah, so it postponed later, but a couple of members of the other bands had gone back to school, so they had to kind of regroup and reshuffle, and it was I don't remember being particularly chaotic, but I also don't remember a whole lot of people being there, you know? But it was really how we met most of the people that we very quickly became friends with. We were, of course, way underage, so we were not really supposed to be out in the club, but I mean,
Kitty Ben.
yeah, we were kind of kept in the kiddie den behind stage. But I remember that we called Casey and got a hold of John Hewlett and said, you know, hey, you wanna come down to the punk festival, you know, and he said, well, yeah, leave my name at the door, and I don't remember if we actually left his name at the door, but I think he did show up. Anyway, so it was kind of a free-for-all, and it was visionary, actually. We had props and craziness and all kinds of stuff, but I don't know how many people were there that weren't on stage at some point that night, you know?
I was there. I was there.
Okay, you were not on stage at that point.
No, we weren't there.
And Dirt Wheeler showed 38 or 48, whatever, 8 millimeters of Iggy
Oh, you
on
showed
the
Ziggy
wall.
film.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
no sound or anything, just showing them there on the wall, and another stunningly whatever, forward-thinking move. Anyway, but it was fun. It was fun, and it went way too late, and I think we all had to get up and go to school in the morning. Caroline, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we did.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, anyway. So something else I'm gonna throw in here, just in an interesting connection and an interesting twist, that KWUR being a project for engineering students, that WashU engineering students, that Streetside Records, I think, started as a business school project for, you know, with two guys, and then JD started working there, so he was almost in the beginning. And so Streetside was a big, especially Streetside on Delmar was a big place where we would go, you know, to find records and whatnot, and then
Sure.
ended up working there much later. So,
Well, they were, I know, when we talked before, there, a lot of connections were, you mentioned, a lot of connections were made in the lobby outside the booth, and one of the bands, if I'm not mistaken, that was formed in the lobby was raymilland, wasn't it?
Yes, actually it was. We started, me and Rick Busher, who we grew up together in Lehigh, we started, we would go to concerts and things like that, so we went to the Ramones show in Lebanon, Illinois.
Oh.
At the Stonehenge, and that's kind of where we met everybody. That's where Steve gave us a flyer, and then we started hanging out there on Friday nights on Dave's shows. We started hanging out there, and then eventually we met Greg Black and Dave Sundberg, and that's where we formed raymilland. But before that, Rick and I did a fanzine called Monomania. We did one issue of it, and you know, it was a punk scene. And after that, we started just focusing on the band. But yeah, that's where we met. We would go and listen to the show and then go find some parking lot to hang out in, or go to Denny's or something, or try to go to a party or something. But yeah.
So did you, let me just verify this. The PowerPoint is not working for me, so. So Dave, you put this ad in for people to bring their tapes in. Was raymilland one of the bands that got played on the station?
No, we didn't have anything at that point. We didn't have anything, any tapes or anything.
How long after did you guys first record?
I think we started recording in '79. By then we weren't at the station. I don't think you were at the station at that.
I was gone by 79.
Yeah, so we started recording after that. We started recording in '79, like the fall.
Do you any of you remember what the bands got played on the air that you heard on the shows?
Yeah, just to backtrack, the thing is I completely forgotten about that ad until Rusty pulled it off the internet again. But I forgot that was actually one of the first things that I had thought about at the time, was that you know, let's try, there's bands here, there's musicians here, let's start putting them on the radio. There wasn't anything that was like local that I was ever aware of, but it just seemed like one should do that. Part of why I was anxious to do that was because in the fall of 1976, one of the guys that was also at the radio station, his name was David Coy, and he was the program director. But he was more of like a jazz head. But he was apparently taking a recording engineering class at WashU. And he had a session with a group locally. And he told me after doing that, he was like, they're coming back in to do some overdubs. I don't understand them at all, but maybe you will. And so I did go, and the Moldy Dogs were recording. And I saw him doing I think there was like, maybe is there like a viola or a cello in Bring Me Jane's Head. They recorded, I watched them finish a song called Bring Me Jane's Head, which was a song about the decapitation of Jane Mansfield. And I was like, oh yeah, these guys are great. I love it. And it's really totally cool. But as far as running an ad, I did get a couple of groups that brought tapes in. I don't recall, but I think one of them actually called themselves Missouri. And yeah. And I was like, you pronounce that Misery? But nothing that I ever played on the show. We always played tapes. We played local tapes, but there weren't very many. And none that really come to mind.
Actually, I have a question from a professor at DePaul in Chicago for you. That's on this same thing. I'm not gonna say his name because I will butcher it. He's working on a book about early punk radio shows, and found out I was doing this. And his question was, how did the other DJs and faculty at WashU react to the stuff that you would see before doing that?
I don't know that the faculty was even aware. There were no like faculty advisors or anything like that. This was strictly like, seat of the pants kind of thing. And as far as other DJs that were there, I mean, there was a real mixed bag of stuff. And well, Steve can tell you about one of them. Am I right?
Why don't you talk about how we rock your company? Because you only talked about having in your summer.
Oh, well then, okay, so yeah, so in,
Talk about that and how people started hanging out.
okay,
Then we can talk about other shows.
okay. The connection with the Moldies, because I had seen them recording and learning about the Welders, doing the recordings, the promo things, going to those shows, starting to see people hanging out with Steve. We would talk records all the time, and I was anxious to make the radio station be like interesting, and do cool things. And it was all jazz in the evening hours, but there was a guy that was doing a Christian rock show. There was a guy that used to follow me, which I understand he's continued to do radio in St. Louis, maybe on KDHX, Chuck Lavazzi. Yeah, cool. Yeah, Chuck Lavazzi used to do a thing called the Gonzo Radio Show. It was right after my punk rock show. So he would come in, and he was like a drama guy. And he would come in, and there would be like all these crazy kids like out in the
That's cool.
oh, is that from one of the original program guys?
Scott, here's, I've got, see, I wish there was a.
Is that what that's from?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got it from the WashU archives.
Oh, nice. Yeah, cool. Wow, there we go. 2 hours of rock and roll, snaps, crackles, and pops. Featured are the original rock and rockabilly, a dash of new wave, Steve's esoteric faves, which probably included the Raspberry, and the best of pop rock, all hooks included.
And the driving sound with Answer Steve.
Talk about people hanging out.
Let me throw something in there about people hanging out.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh.
And how
I was busy
doing a show.
Right. But it was a little, as I recall, really like a low slung building, driving to the parking lot. There was at least, I mean, it wasn't like it was known or easy to find. I mean, this was before the Interbelt or anything. So we were coming from North County. We had to, you had to drive through Pagedale and over Hanley and past crematorium and all that. I wanted to get there. So it was hard to find to begin with. And you pull up into the parking lot, and as I recall, you had to walk down some stairs into this building, which is and it was not huge.
It was the women's building at Washington University, right?
The women's.
It was the base, they used it for meetings and stuff.
I don't call it having frilly curtains or anything, but made it the women's.
It's weird, that's what they call them.
Oh, well, there you go. So, and there was the studio, glass, door, and a not so big anteroom, and then a smaller, like little lobby that you'd come down these stairs. And, you know, so as we got to have kind of a crowd of people there, we were having a good time when we were not quiet. And, you know, giggling and stupid and doing whatever, and here's poor Dave trying to do a radio show.
It's all good.
So I can only assume what it sounded like, because I don't recall that we were listening or anything. We may have gone out with the car and turned it on or something, but, you know, it was really just, you know, a hangout. And now that I think about what that must have been like to try to work during that time period, you know, and as you said the other night, you were always on the show. You were putting on the show, so we were having a good time, but we didn't really get to know you all that well at that point in time because of that.
Bob said something the other night. You talked about the records that you would hear there.
Yeah, it was a great place to find new music. I remember coming in a couple times. Oh, it would happen all the time. You come in and Dave would just have something that was incredible that you never heard of, like the Jam record, and you know, lots of stuff like that, and all the Generation X stuff and all of that.
Sure.
So it was a great place to go and find out about new stuff, because he always got
He's a record guy.
He's a record guy, but that, you know, to hear that stuff back then, you had to really go search for it. You couldn't,
Right.
It wasn't on the radio or on TV or anything. So to actually get the records, you had to find out about it and read magazines and go buy it yourself. Because that was the frustrating part, was that radio didn't play any of that stuff. It didn't play any of it, and they wouldn't play any of it because it wasn't worth their time. So at some point it was ridiculous, because the best music around was being played on that station or on stations like that, and it was being ignored by every place else. And that was part of the fun of it, actually, because if they, you know, in case you did play those things, it would have been horrible. You know, I mean, could you imagine KC Radio, the Buzz Guy, coming up on KC with Charlie Daniel, right? Something else, you know. So yeah, it was a great place to find out about stuff. And also there were other bands that came through that formed there. I think the Retros formed there, like Bob's in the audience there. I mean, there was just kind of a flow of people that came in and started you know, getting turned up by the music and just showing up there. So it was a great place to meet people, you know. And after the first Ramones show, that was really the spark. That was when everybody who was at the Ramones show kind of showed up there the next week.
Yeah.
And me and Rick had known Steve Scariano because we grew up kind of in the same separate neighborhoods, you know, competing high schools, if you will. But you know, we'd seen him around, and then we saw him at the Ramones, and then you know, we made a lot of friends from the radio station that we're still friends with. But it was, you know, the punk thing was very lonely back then because nobody liked it. You know, nobody liked that stuff. It was all just certain groups of people. But the vast majority of teenagers were going to see, I don't know, Styx,
Sure.
Kansas. Yeah, so kind of like you look and go, I wish we were going, kind of, but you know what I mean? It was kind of, you know, we were pioneers. It's kind of lonely. We were pioneers, right?
It's true.
Is this the beginning of the Fun 100? Does that start in the lobby outside the radio station?
That's kind of after we were there, because yeah, that was kind of, we were away from there by then. That was like 79, I think, that like the club IP, correct, Tony? Yeah, that was.
You guys were the original crowd.
The original crowd, yeah. It was small, but that was then it branched out into that, the Fun 100 and all of those people. Yeah.
Steve, tell me what other people thought.
I'm sorry.
What are the other DJs think of what you do?
Um,
Sorry, I'm jumping.
well, listen, the whole, like Bob said, it was lonely. And it was about finding your tribe. And when Dave and I would go record shopping, especially when we were at Peaches, we'd see somebody else looking through the import singles, which is where all the English punk stuff was. And I think you started putting up flyers about Rocket.
Mhm.
And so you'd see people out and about, but you gotta remember, there was nothing to do.
Denny's on.
There was
Hampton.
nowhere for us to go. There was nowhere, there weren't shows happening. People weren't renting VFW halls yet for their bands to play. So there was nothing. I mean,
There's no cable.
there was no cable. And you couldn't hear KWUR outside of the parking lot unless you had some elaborate FM setup in your home with antennas and stuff that could get it. And so we would tell people, and it's like, well, you can't hear it. And then, so people started coming and the hanging out, and they would hear this party going on, but they would come in and be talking on the air. And I know there were some people who came by who said, yeah, I sound like fun. And so they started showing up. So it was a way of, like I said, we found our tribe. And after the show was over, there was nothing to do. We would go walk around Del Mar. Sometimes there'd be a party. We'd be lucky, there'd be a party. We'd go down to the West End and walk around there. But that was the thing. There was nothing happening. But then slowly but surely, some of the better known punk bands started coming to town. And then bands started to emerge, and you start to see people outside the radio station who you knew you were into this stuff, but you didn't know them.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, they're cool. And then bands started running out VFW halls, and it slowly built.
You didn't get any pushback from anybody else at the radio station? Nobody else was complaining you were playing heathen music or bringing in drug addicts to sit in the lobby and.
Yeah, the guy that was playing the Christian rock, I don't know what he thought of it, but, no, most of the people at the radio station were cool. They didn't get it, you know what I mean, like they weren't like, oh yeah, love that new Eddie and the Hot Rod song. No,
But the kids from New York, there were kids from New York.
there were, that's right, yeah, good point. There were several people that I knew at WashU, because there were a lot of East Coast kids at WashU. There were several people that, I met, at different points, but there were some that used to come down, hang at the radio station.
That actually brings up, so one of my favorite stories you told me was the first Christmas
Okay,
and how you kept it on the air. And
yeah,
part of that story was asking the guys from New York to bring you back.
sure.
So can you tell that story?
Marathon came a little later, but, school break, Christmas time, right, winter break. Almost everybody's from somewhere else, so they're all going home for the holidays. Guess who would be at the radio station 14, 16 hours a day, just keeping it on the air the whole time? It was the one townie that worked at the radio station. And so that was pretty amazing, to be able to do that. And I got better and, learned not to start records at the wrong speed, which is a trademark of college radio.
So what were you playing during this 14 or 16 hours?
Well, sometimes backtracking just a little bit, before KWUR, there had been another radio station there. It was an AM, what do they call it? It was like a channel radio thing. It was only available in dormitories. But they had been getting record service from the record companies since the 1950s. KWUR, the first thing they did when they made me music director was they were like, well, you're gonna have to like alphabetize the records. And I was like, yeah, I'm on it. This is fucking great, because there was like all these records that I knew of but had never heard. It was actually
it was that winter that I played for myself for the first time, the Big Star Radio City record. I knew about this group Big Star, but I'd never heard them. And so there was a copy of the record, and Steve and I bonded over that. That's like another hole, down another rabbit hole. But the thing that you're referring to was during that period, because there were a lot of these other kids that were from the East Coast. There was a kid at the radio station that was from New Jersey. He was going home for the holidays. And I said, I gave him $25 cash. I said, there's this record store in Greenwich Village called Bleecker Bob's. It's on McDougal Street. I read about it. It was like the place in New York to get like the very coolest like underground stuff. And I was like, buy me a copy of a record called Little Johnny Jewel by Television. I think it's on a label called Orc. And like what other records they say are cool. So he came back in January with Little Johnny Jewel, the original 45. Richard Helen Voidoid's Blank Generation EP. Wayne County and Backstreet Boys, Max's Kansas City, which is a double-sided 45, where he name checks all the current bands playing in Max's Kansas City. It's an amazing record. And to hear that in January of 76 or 77 was like, that was a mind blow. The first single by Blondie, Ex-Offender, and a forgotten, fallen through the cracks of history 45 by a group called The Hounds, which was called Call Me. It's like a glammy stomper. They're not the same as the Northern Illinois band, The Hounds. But it was a cool record. So those 5 records, he came back, and that was like, along with all the other stuff I was playing at the time, which was, was stuff like Flaming Groovies and The Dictators and the first Ramones record and Eddie and the Hot Rods and a whole bunch of other like UK pub rock things, glam stuff, all of that. That's what I was playing.
So were these your albums, or did you get a budget to buy stuff?
Well, for the most part, it was mine. All of that stuff was mine. But to answer your question about that period in the wintertime, I mean, I would pull something, I would put it on. I mostly just played stuff that I wanted to hear.
She was just playing records.
I was just playing records. Yeah, and I didn't know if there was anybody out there at all, but it was during that period that Steve and I bonded a little bit more. And then I was like, damn, he's like this big, he's this other cool like record guy. Let me try and get him a show too, which I did. Because I could do that.
Replacement show.
Yeah, right.
Who did you replace?
No, I think he was
kidding.
Who's flamed out? Oh, okay, I thought maybe somebody flamed out on the air.
But he did
No.
start in the summer.
It was.
He did start in the summer.
Yeah, it was in the summer, yeah. 77, right.
Who did what? Oh, how about your Dirty 30 list?
Sure, so I assume there's a lot of people here of a certain age that grew up here in St. Louis and may or may not have listened to KXOK when they were really tiny lads. I did. So KXOK used to do a thing that was called the KXOK 6+30 survey. And it was like a bookmark sized half sheet of paper that had all the current, the Beatles and Jerry and the Pacemakers and the Supremes and where they all ranked that week. And so I was kind of doing my own take on that, but this was the Dirty 30. And everybody that was hanging out like in the lounge outside the radio station, I would get them to vote on their favorite records. And so then different people would help with all that, with compiling it. And I would put it together and take it to record stores. And this was what we were playing at that point in time. There's 6 or 8 of them, I think. I mean, I think I have 8. It was a lot of work. I mean, just in terms of like, tabulating the results and putting it together, learning how to, how to do a primitive sort of graphic layout. The very first one is completely handwritten.
Mhm.
And then I started, typing them up or whatever. But that was just like a fun thing. to kind of like- People would call in, yeah, that's right. We'd get a phone call and somebody would call in with their, with their, whatever their 15 records were that they were voting for. Did you guys, you would like do those?
I think so,
Yeah,
we did,
yeah, you
Everybody
voted, right?
adopted them.
Yeah,
Is that number one?
yeah, that's the first one.
Okay.
Which I did in July, it looks like July of 1977. It was right around the same time that I guess we got you started on here. And we also got, Steve knew somebody that we got, Joe Convaleri on as the Mighty Striker to do St. Louis's first reggae radio show. So, because this, for us, like this stuff was all intertwined,
You talk about Joe for a minute. Go ahead.
Some of you might remember Joe, years later, had a longtime reggae show on KWUR. Joe was quite a character, and he was somebody who, he was also a record guy that started hanging out at the station because he had a few mutual friends who were hanging out. Like I said, a major character, and he was the encyclopedic knowledge of reggae, had a big reggae collection. Now, if you guys remember his KWUR reggae show, it was kind of straight ahead, but it was also, he had this great personality. His KWUR show was insane.
Yeah.
There were tapes of it. I followed him. I'd go in early just to listen to Joe's show, and I'd just sit there in awe. It was so entertaining. He would do things like he put on a reggae dub 12-inch on one turntable, and on the other one he'd have dialogue from the Taxi Driver soundtrack. He got Travis Bickle talking over this dub reggae thing.
Yeah.
Things like what mashups are now, what hip hop DJs do now. He was doing that.
And I hooked up a thing with two tape decks.
Right.
So he could get slapback echo.
He only spoke with slapback
That
echo,
was cool.
reverb on
We
it, and
It was really like, it was just like being like Jamaican DJs, sort of.
exactly.
Yeah, it was really cool.
Sometimes Joe would just, we just put on a Don Rickles record in the middle of his reggae show. God, I wish there were tapes of the Mighty Strikers first KWUR show.
Reggae spectacular.
Reggae Spectacular. Yeah, Joe's knows the Mighty Striker. He's no longer with us, but man, that show was just amazing, and I had to follow it.
Yeah.
And it was cool because I think there was a sense, at least for me, I think for you too, that there was something special about being on the radio, especially if you'd like grown up listening to it and hearing records on the radio. It was just like, man, I was like a kid in a candy store for 2.5 years. And it was, I mean, I was an obsessive record buyer at the time. I was starting to work in record stores as well. I was starting to, you would see ads in PRM, like Phonograph Record Magazine, for, there's this band from North Carolina that's putting out this record, and they're called Sneakers. And if you like the Kinks and the Who and Big Star, you might like this. That was the first record I ever mail ordered directly from a band. And those are the guys that, it's like Chris Stanley and Mitch Easter, and I think I turned you on to that Sneakers record.
We sent away.
Sent away for it, yeah, because you read about it. Yeah, where were we going?
We won't, actually, we got about 5 minutes. Yeah, it's almost 7:30, we gotta. So actually, I wanna ask, this is kind of what I started with, was, the four of you can look back, or not just look back, but look forward, from the seeds you helped plant, and then 50 years of a scene that's still active. Oh, Sean. When you look back at that time and what you helped plant in St. Louis, what do you think? It is, and don't smirk at me. It really is. I mean, it's there around the country. There are in Boulder, Colorado, in Washington, D.C., in Portland, the scene started around this radio station where people came and hung outside the door. It's it's either a record store or it's a radio station or one pool club or something. And it really is. I mean, there were other things happening in other places, but this is one of the things that gave rise to what so many people grew up doing. And I wonder what you think of kind of where it went and where it's, what happened after you planted it.
It was cool to watch it grow. I mean, I left St. Louis in June of 1980. I moved to Chicago. I had two different families, and I decided I was going to go back to Chicago. I was done here. When I went up there, it was a whole lot more going on. I ended up playing in a band, the manager of which had a similar radio show in Chicago, the Sunday Morning Nightmare on WCRD. And Terry Nelson, who did that radio show for years in Chicago, is sort of legendary in Chicago punk scenes and punk circles. So I mean, I kind of fell into a lot more and continued to be involved as a musician and filmmaker and different stuff for most of the 80s. I don't know. I don't know if there's ever going to be a period that was as amazing, like amazing world-changing records were dropping every 5 minutes. You couldn't keep up with it. There was so many new things going on in that 76 to 82 period, and then it started to like branch in a lot of different ways. I don't know. I mean, I don't really keep up with a lot anymore. That was a really exciting time. I mean, I listen to a lot of music on YouTube and I try to hunt out new and different things, but that was a pretty special, like 5-6 year period.
I think the thing is, there was nowhere to play back then. And there, after that, after the punk thing, there was a network of small clubs you could play at, but before there wasn't. There was like Mississippi Nights, and they'd have bar bands or disco. There was no place for bands to play at all. You had to rent VFW halls. And it was pretty dreadful. The music in general was pretty bad back then. And eventually Mississippi Nights decided that, well, we're going to bring these bands in because people want them. But at first they didn't let anybody in who was under 21. So we would stand outside occasionally looking in the window because we couldn't get in. I remember standing on beer cans to watch the Boomtown Rats because we couldn't get in to see them. And the owners of the clubs would be like, well, we're never going to have kids in here. There's no way we're going to lose our liquor license. And then within like a year, it's like, oh, we got a kids section over there. Because after MTV and all of that, they didn't have a choice. So after the original punk thing, there was a bunch of clubs all over the country that would, like Cicero's or Blueberry Hill, that bands could tour and play. I mean, that's the main thing. It's just having a whole network open.
That's a good point.
Well, the Welders played 9 times the whole time we were together. Isn't that what it is? Is that what I remember from listening to Caroline? Is that right? Like 9 times in 4 years or something? Was it?
Like 20 or something.
Okay. I just remember it wasn't a lot for the time we were together. It wasn't a ton. Yeah, does anybody have a question they want to ask?
I do. Steve, if you weren't a student at WashU, how did you get a radio show?
He lied.
He just did, he said you're gonna have.
Just you got a
Oh, is
shot.
that-
Here, yeah, you take this time slot. We'll put it in the program guide. Done.
He even filled out all the FCC things.
I used to fill
I
out.
never did
Yeah.
any of this.
I used to have to do all the FCC logs and all that. But here's the other part too. Technically, even on a 10-watt station, you're supposed to be licensed to be broadcasting, but you have to get an FCC, what's it called? Class 4 radio broadcast license, whatever it is. That winter that I was the townie keeping the radio station on the air, all the other people, one of those days they traveled up to Chicago because at Loyola University, they were doing an FCC, cattle call to get your radio broadcast license. So everybody else at the radio station had a license, but I didn't. But yeah, so that's just how it went. Nobody was watching.
The thing you gotta remember, remember that documentary from back then, Music War?
Yeah, yeah.
It really was a music war. And I mean, people got beat up for liking this music. Our friend Drew Wheeler got.
show.
And then didn't he get beat up at our show at Stonehenge?
In the
Yeah, we played, my and Dave's band, Singapore, played with the Welders, and our friend Bert got beat up at the show. We got pelted with tomatoes that
That's
night.
right. Yep. Yeah. Cool.
Honest.
Punk rock.
It was a music war that we eventually won, and the thing was, we only wanted to we wanted people to hear it.
Yeah.
That's all we were doing, it's like, because we thought, how can you not like this? These records are so exciting.
Yeah.
And it kind of peaked for me when, about 2000, of us went down to Memphis to see the second show the Sex Pistols did in the United States. Me and Dave and Jim Ring was here. A month or two later, we went up to Cleveland to see the Clash in their first tour. And it was kind of over for me after that. The local scene started getting kind of big, and we kind of dropped out of it. Well, you had your band Culture, who were in it
For a while.
for a while. I eventually moved in '81 because I couldn't find anybody to play with. I had a chance to be in a band elsewhere, and so I moved to Champaign, Illinois. But those seeds that we planted at the radio station, it grew into a really cool scene. And the legacy for me is being with these people who, everybody who hung out at KWUR back then, at Dave's show, all those people are still cool.
Still friends.
And still friends. I can't think of too many of them who became Trumpers. If any, but that's the thing, the amazing story of the Welders and the raymilland people who became this really close, tight-knit family unit, still going strong. That's the best part for me, is that the lifelong friendships.
Yeah.
The phrase shared experience is priceless. I was reminded of earlier this week that, for all of us, it was a shared experience. I suspect most of the people here connected in some way to all of that. And to me, that's what the radio station was as well. It wasn't just about, being the guy on the radio spinning the records. It was about sharing it with people. It was about trying to get bands to bring in their demo tapes, involving all the people in the Dirty 30 thing, doing things like, if you can name the artists of those 5 versions of Sweet Jane that I just played, you will win the shirt off my back. And somebody did, and it was a Mott the Hoople t-shirt. And so, trying to involve people and having a shared experience was an infinitely important part of the entire punk movement. I asked my friend Jim last night what he thought the most important thing was, and it's so obvious. And he said it's the DIY nothing. It was the do it yourself. That's exactly where I was coming from with it, and that's where the whole movement was coming from. Was this idea that you actually could do it yourself. You could put out a record. Wow. Music industry changed because of this stuff, and because of the people that were involved in it. It was cool to be a part of it. That's all I got.
Oh, just a quick question, would you write your record labels to see if they send you promos?
more like indie record labels, everybody, you have the budget to do that, or?
One of the, well, I didn't really solicit that, but one of the things that was going on at the time was Bomb magazine out of California, Greg Shaw's magazine. They did a thing for a while, it's called the Bomb newsletter, and it came out every week. It was just a Xerox typewritten thing, but it was names and addresses of bands and clubs and radio stations, and I got my show in the Bond newsletter. So stuff would just start showing up. I mean, one day I got a package and I opened it up, it was from this band from Ohio called Devo. And it was the first, it was the Jocko Homo Mongoloid 45. They just arrived, that was a cool thing. That was all part of that DIY thing too.
Right,
Yeah,
write
right.
it down.
I know. And a few months later, the second one, can't get me no satisfaction, 45. Same deal.
Wow.
Other stuff too, the pop band, the Nerds, they wanted us to set up a gig for them because they were doing one of the first independent band, the Nerds from LA. I tried to find a club for them to play at. I was unsuccessful, though I think they played in
They played the same night the Ramones played. That's why we didn't see them. They played in Belleville.
Okay, yeah, they got the gig without us, but the point is there really was this whole circle network. It was a network of people.
Have you been to KWUR on this trip or since then?
No, I've never been back.
So there's a possibility that these records are still there.
Many of them were in like 2011.
Did you work there?
I was a student from 2007 to 2011
Oh, cool.
and DJ there.
Yeah,
You should go by. Wow.
and so with the microphone sticker, the big white sticker with the microphone on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should go by. If you can.
It's not still in the Williams building, it's
You'll have to-
somewhere else.
You can find out.
Yeah.
It's not a secret.
Sure.
We have one story we didn't tell.
Michelle,
Go ahead.
In, what was it, spring or
It would have been fall.
fall of 77 when school was coming back? I came up with this idea of doing a marathon
No, that's
So-
not either.
to promote the station. And, I think I saw it in a movie or something. So
they should.
me and Dave.
Yeah.
Not together, but one of us was on the air from
3 days.
Friday afternoon to 6 o'clock the following Sunday. That weekend, and people hung out in the parking lot. It was kind of a big deal, and it's a lot of fun. And we had a couple other friends at 3 in the morning were on while we were sleeping.
Did you repeat anything?
I don't know. You mean like?
We were just traveling anything out of the library and putting it on because we fun, yeah.
Okay, I think we have to wrap it up. Sorry. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thank you.
I'm the director of memory outreach and alumni relations for kind of stuff. Two things. One, yes, it's in the back. And also our online broadcast is on Saturday, and you guys should come if you want to pop by. We could
Yeah, I'll continue. So we just started this semester. We wanted to make more of an effort to keep the memory of KWUR alive. So it's a new initiative that we're starting. But we also want to create an alum network. So we're starting from the ground up. We have nothing. We don't have any contacts. So maybe we should start a Facebook group. But we're wondering what is the best way to connect with our alums. We don't want to yeah.
Are you considered alumni if you've actually left the school before they kicked you out? Because that's me. Yeah. It was cool. It's a cool thing. Yeah, it's cool that you're doing it. It's a really great experience. It was for me.
Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to everybody up here. This
Thank
is
you.
really cool, and thank you for coming and telling your story. You know what? I'm gonna make one announcement just because the Archive of St. Louis Punk is run by donations, not of money, but of stuff. And if you have garbage in your basement from punk rock and you don't want it anymore, let me know, and I'm happy to take care of it for the next 100 years. I'm gonna throw some cards back on the thing. If there's anything you want, anything you don't. So we got. I'm ready to die. So many great